1,200. You know, in the intensely competitive world of Canadian immigration, that number isn't just some random goal. It is literally the holy grail. It's the absolute perfect score in the express entry points game, which is basically the system that decides who gets to call Canada home and who has to keep waiting. But how on earth do you actually achieve a score that high? Or honestly, better yet, what score do you really need to win?
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the 2026 Express Entry Strategy Playbook. If you're trying to figure out how to master the Canadian immigration system, you are in the exact right place. We're going to break down the latest 2026 government updates, demystify all these scoring formulas, and look at the hard data to find out how successful candidates are boosting their numbers. I'm really thrilled to guide you through this, because once you understand the underlying structure, this whole bureaucratic web actually makes perfect strategic sense.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll welcome the 2026 Express Entry updates. Then go over the federal skilled worker basics, crack that CRS code, look at strategies to maximize your points, and finally, build your Express Entry action plan.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1. Welcome to Express Entry 2026, Canada's new target talent.
So, just this past February, the Immigration Minister laid out exactly who Canada is prioritizing to fill some really critical labor gaps in a shifting economy. For 2026, the strategy is leaning heavily into specialized skills. The government is introducing highly targeted draws for foreign medical doctors, researchers, and senior managers who have Canadian work experience. They are also urgently looking for transport occupations. We're talking pilots, aircraft mechanics, inspectors, people like that. Plus, there is a brand new category this year for highly skilled foreign military applicants. Think military doctors and nurses who will actually be recruited directly by the Canadian Armed Forces.
Okay, let's dive into this, because you might be wondering about the previous priorities. Don't worry, the 2026 updates don't mean Canada is throwing its old lists out the window. The classics from 2025 are still going strong. If you've got strong French proficiency, or if you're in healthcare and social services, like nurse practitioners, dentists, psychologists, you're still in super high demand. And the same goes for critical trades. Carpenters, plumbers, machinists, you are absolutely still on the radar.
Moving on to Section 2, Federal Skilled Worker Basics, the gating criteria. Now, before you even worry about that massive 1,200-point scorecard, you've got to get your foot in the door. The Federal Skilled Worker Program, or FSW, is the main pathway if you're applying from outside of Canada. To even qualify to enter the pool, you've got to pass 3 foundational steps. Step 1, you need at least 1 year of continuous, full-time skilled work experience in the last 10 years, falling under specific occupational categories known as Tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. Step 2, you have to hit a Canadian language benchmark, or CLB, of 7 minimum across reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And Step 3, you need an Educational Credential Assessment, or ECA, just to prove your foreign degree matches a Canadian one. The absolute beauty of this program, you literally don't need a single day of Canadian work experience to qualify.
But hold on, hitting those 3 steps isn't quite the whole story. You also need to hit this magic number, 67. The FSW program has its own initial selection grid out of 100 points, factoring in things like your age, education, language, work experience, and adaptability. You absolutely must score at least a 67 out of 100 just to be allowed into the pool. It's basically the bouncer at the door of the Express Entry Club.
And to round out these basics, you've got to prove you can financially support yourself once you land. For a single applicant right now, you're looking at needing about 14,690 Canadian dollars in settlement funds. That amount scales up depending on your family size, of course. The only real exception to this financial baseline is if you already hold a valid Canadian job offer.
All right, Section 3, cracking the CRS code, the 1,200-point scorecard.
So you made it past the bouncer, you're in the pool. Now you face the Comprehensive Ranking System, or CRS. This is the ultimate 1,200-point scorecard that decides your permanent residency fate. And this brilliantly illustrates how those 1,200 points are broken down, because they are definitely not treated equally. You've got core human capital factors capping out at 500 points. Skill transferability gives you up to 100. If you have an accompanying spouse, they can add up to 40. But wow, look at that massive 600-point slice for additional points. That means half of the entire pie is reserved for very specific, highly prized factors. We'll get to exactly what those are in just a second.
First, let's look closer at your core human capital points, starting with age. Now, this is the one factor you really can't control, which makes timing absolutely crucial. As you can see, points peak at 110 if you're in your 20s.
By the time you hit 35, it drops to 77. By 40, you're down to 50. And once you hit 45, you get 0 points for your age. Keep in mind, getting 0 points here doesn't mean you're ineligible, but man, it leaves a massive gap that you've got to make up somewhere else. Next up is education. Notice how climbing that academic ladder just totally boosts your score. Looking at the maximums without a spouse, a high school diploma nets you just 30 points. But a bachelor's degree? Boom, up to 120. A master's bumps you to 135, and a PhD maxes this category out at 150 points. The bottom line is pretty simple. The CRS system heavily rewards advanced degrees.
Which brings us to Section 4, Strategies to Maximize Points, High-Yield Moves.
Okay, so how do we actually hack the system to beat those sky-high cutoff scores?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the strategy of applying with a partner. If you apply as a single applicant, your personal human capital factors are capped at 500 points. But if you apply with a spouse, your personal cap drops to 460. Those missing 40 points actually shift over to your spouse's profile, specifically looking at their education, language skills, and Canadian work experience. So if your partner doesn't score well in those areas, they could literally drag your total score down. That means couples absolutely need to sit down, do the math both ways, and figure out who the strongest principal applicant really is.
We also need to impartially clear the air on a huge misconception, what I call the job offer myth. A lot of folks still try to base their whole strategy on landing a Canadian job offer to spike their score. But here's the reality. As the source data confirms, on March 25, 2025, the government officially removed the 50 to 200 CRS points that they used to give out for valid job offers. That lever is just completely gone. Sure, a job offer might help you out with certain provincial programs, but as a pure CRS point multiplier, you've got to look elsewhere for major score boosts.
And honestly, this right here is the biggest elsewhere you're going to find. 600 points. That is the sheer power of securing a provincial nominee program or PNP nomination. Remember that giant half of the pie we saw earlier? Getting a provincial nomination hands you those 600 points in one fell swoop. Because general draws are so fiercely competitive right now, a PNP practically guarantees you an invitation to apply. If your core score is stuck in the 400s, targeting a specific province that desperately needs your exact occupation is, for sure, the most reliable play on the board.
But what if a PNP just isn't in the cards for you? What is your best move? Language is your ultimate lever. It is the absolute fastest, highest yield factor that is entirely within your control. The data actually shows that if you retake your test and push your scores from a CLB 7 to a CLB 9 across reading, writing, speaking, and listening, something amazing happens. You don't just bump up your core language points. You simultaneously unlock a massive chunk of bonus points in the skill transferability bucket. Literally, one stellar language test can spike your score far more than grinding out an extra year of work experience, just because it double dips into 2 different point buckets.
Moving into our final stretch, Section 5, your Express Entry Action Plan, the path to PR.
Let's move to and see how this builds in the real world. Once you actually understand the rules and secure that coveted invitation, what does the timeline look like? Well, month 1 is all about gathering your ECA and language tests, creating that profile, and getting yourself into the pool. Month 2 is grind time. You're actively working to improve your CRS, maybe retaking that language test, until you finally snag that ITA, the invitation to apply. From there, you've got 60 days to lock everything down. By month 4, you are submitting the full permanent residency application, getting medicals done, giving biometrics, and if your application is clean and accurate, the government's target processing time means that by month 6, your permanent residency can be fully approved. That's right, it's designed to be a fast 6-month sprint from the moment you hit submit.
So that wraps up our explainer. You've seen Canada's target occupations for 2026, we've walked through the gating criteria, decoded the math behind those 1,200 points, and you now know that language tests and provincial nominations are your absolute heaviest hitters. So looking at your own background, your education, your experience, what is your first strategic move going to be to conquer this scorecard? It's time to gather those documents, run your numbers, and make your move. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.